Hey everybody, my name's Adam, and today we are going to be talking about the end times and the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Now we're going to be talking about this in a very, very interesting way. What I'm going to be doing is presenting a new argument that you've probably never heard before. Now this argument is going to be structured in a very interesting way. I'm going to be building my argument for the continuation of the Holy Spirit based upon eschatology. Let me show you the passage in Acts chapter 2. It says, on the day of Pentecost, they were all together in the same place, and then this rushing wind comes in, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they all started speaking in tongues. But what's amazing about this passage is that it goes on to tell us that they were in the last days. Well, if they were in the last days 2,000 years ago, and they had the Holy Spirit, then that means we also have the Holy Spirit and the same gifts. Hey, welcome to Scholar U. Be sure to click subscribe and the bell notification because we publish a brand new video every single day. So today we're going to be talking about the gifts of the Holy Spirit and the end times. Now, the reason why we're going to be talking about this is because we've been spending the entire summer talking about eschatology. Now, eschatology is the study of end times, the study of last things. And since we've been studying this for the entire summer, it just makes sense for us to talk about the gifts of the Holy Spirit because Acts chapter 2 most definitely connects the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Holy Spirit to the last days. So let me show you in Acts chapter 2 how that's possible. It says right here that the day of Pentecost had fully come and they were all in the same place, and then this rushing wind comes in. And the rushing wind is obviously the Holy Spirit. And it says, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit and they began to speak in languages that were not their own. Just to take a little pause for a second and explain this passage, Acts chapter 2 is most clearly talking about one person who speaks one language. They received the Holy Spirit, and they were able to speak another language. It actually goes on to tell us that. There were Jews in Jerusalem and from all over the area, and they started speaking to everybody in their own language. In fact, it even talks here, it says, behold, these people are Galileans, and they're not even speaking in their own language. And it goes on to mention all the kinds of people who were there. So it's very clear that Acts chapter 2 is talking about language. They received another language. So the charismatics and Pentecostals of today who say, oh, well, it's gibberish or babble or whatever it is that they're saying, they're wrong. It tells us here in verse 14 that Peter stood up with the 11 and he raised his voice and he said, people in Judea and in Jerusalem, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days, God will pour out his Spirit on all flesh. So which days would those be? It is the days of the last days. So Peter the Apostle is the one who made this connection of the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and the last days. And so basically what he says is pretty obvious. We're in the last days, and because we are in the last days, we now have the Holy Spirit, and we have the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Now, here's where things get very interesting because in this debate of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, you have two groups of people. The first group are people called continuationists. They basically believe that the gifts of the Holy Spirit still goes on. The other group of people are called cessationists, and they say that all the gifts have ceased, or at least the miraculous and revelatory gifts has ceased. Let me show you what I mean. When we come to gotquestions.org, we get a really interesting definition of continuationism, and it basically says, continuationism is the belief that all the spiritual gifts, including healings, tongues, and miracles, are still in operation today. Also, it should be noted that this website, gotquestions.org, admits that they are in fact cessationist. And so when we go into gotquestions.org and we ask about what do they think about cessationism, this is the argument that we get, and they give us a basic definition. They say cessationism is the view that the miraculous gifts like speaking in tongues and healing have ceased. So those are pretty much the general definitions. I show you gotquestions.org because if you Google what is cessationism or what is continuationism, this is most likely one of the websites that will pop up because, well, that's how Google is ranking it. But I have another article that I want to show you, and this article is pretty interesting, and it's really where this argument starts to take off. So let's go look at it. This is on the Gospel Coalition, and it's written by Thomas Schreiner. And first of all, let me just tell you that he's a very great guy. He's a great scholar, and this is what he looks like. This is his name, and this is who he is. So he's a pretty smart guy. He's written a lot of books, and he's a very interesting person. So he wrote this article called Why I Am a Cessationist, meaning he doesn't think the gifts of the Spirit go on. And he goes on to preference why he's writing this and blah, 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 blah. And like many cessationists, he builds his argument upon Ephesians chapter 2, which is where it famously says that the foundation of the church is built on the apostles and prophets. And so since there are no apostles and prophets anymore, and it goes on to actually say this pretty much exactly like I'm explaining to you right now, he says, to put it another way, we don't have apostles like Paul and Peter and John anymore. And so basically all we have are authoritative teachings, which is perfectly fine. It's kind of a standard answer for the cessationist crowd. But what do you do about speaking in tongues? Well, this is very interesting. He says that this is a very difficult issue, and he's 100% correct about that. This is a very difficult issue. He says this gift signifies the age of the fulfillment has arrived, where God's covenant promises were being realized. And I think he's actually right about that. He goes on to say that tongues are probably equivalent to prophecy, as it seems based on 1 Corinthians chapter 14. And so he makes this interesting claim here. He says, if prophecy has ceased, then tongues most likely have ceased as well. So this is generic cessationist rhetoric, cessationist talk, basic arguments, and they pretty much just say, well, all the gifts have ceased because why not? Now, is there any evidence in the New Testament for this? No, there's not. There's no evidence whatsoever. If you actually read the New Testament, what you'll find out is that it tells you neither or. It doesn't tell you if the gifts have ceased, and it doesn't tell you if they continue on. The Bible is absolutely silent about this matter. However, I have told you before that the New Testament, primarily the foundation of it in terms of theology, is based on eschatology. So eschatology is the end-all, be-all for the New Testament. And in the study of eschatology, we have the Holy Spirit. We have the gifts of the Holy Spirit. In fact, actually, the last days are not declared by Peter until the Holy Spirit falls. So it kind of like begs the question here. Well, if we are in the last days, and we've been in the last days for the last 2,000 years, why would God give us the Holy Spirit and let us have the Holy Spirit, but then take all the gifts away? That doesn't really make sense. That's kind of silly, actually. So, we have ourselves a little bit of a problem here, which is why you have the continuationist crowd and you have the cessationist crowd. But what I would actually say is this. Here's my argument. I don't care about the cessationist or the continuationist. I think they're both wrong because, again, the New Testament doesn't tell us. But what the New Testament does tell us is that eschatology is a very important part of the New Testament. And it also tells us that we are, in fact, in the last days and that the Holy Spirit is here during the last days. Well, we are in the last days. We've been in the last days for the last 2,000 years. And so, therefore, the Holy Spirit is still here. And the gifts are, in fact, still here. That's probably the most simplest of ways to understand it. I know continuationists like to counter these types of ideas, if you will, and they point to the church history, if you will. They use the Wesleyan quadrilateral, and that's fine and everything, but I don't really think that the testimony of the church is really valuable when it comes to the study of the New Testament, because the New Testament says what it says. I don't care about what people 500 years afterwards have to say about the New Testament. And so it just doesn't matter. Their opinion is just as good as mine, and it's just as good as yours. Listen, if you like this video, let me know in the comments below. If you did not like the video, please tell me why. Criticism is good, all comments are welcome, and of course, your opinion is just as valid as mine, so make sure you leave it below. I have some more playlists up here if you want to go and check them out. Don't forget to click right here, because when you do, you'll subscribe to the channel. You get a brand new video just like this every single day. My name's Adam. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.